Hi, I'm Adamsen. We're here in Lincoln Hall at Pitzer School of Law, Northwestern University campus. Honored to be here with Julie Gehrki and John Damales from Walmart. Julie, thanks for being here.
We're glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
Hey, John, thanks for being here as well. If you would, you just share a little bit about yourself and what you do there at Walmart.
Yeah, definitely. So I currently lead global people analytics at Walmart across the different segments and brands internationally.
And Julie, your role?
Sure. I lead philanthropy for Walmart. And so I spend about half my time overseeing our philanthropic investments and about half my time with people like John and business owners thinking about how we can use the business to create shared value.
All right. So right off the bat, if I'm all of a sudden clicking on this video and we're talking, it's like there's a philanthropist and someone who's doing talent analytics, people analytics. How do you two interrelate? Why is it important that you two have some connection over time?
I think one of the great things about our partnership is there's certainly a recognition at Walmart that doing this type of great work isn't just good for society and good feel good, but it's actually good for business. Mm-hmm. I think where teams like Julie's and mine work hand in hand is as we start to implement and institutionalize some of these policies and programs, how can we use data and connect that and use that to speak the language of our business partners to say, well, here's the tangible impact. Mm-hmm. And it's not just anecdotal, it's actually what we can see and measure in business productivity every day.
Outstanding.
Yeah, I think John's exactly right. I think this is a field where we're still learning what works. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's interested in shared value, philanthropy, making social change, improving the business, is asking these questions that need rich data to answer the question. And we're really good on my team about asking questions. John's really good about telling us what we can and can't answer. And then thinking about how do we use that data to really improve the practice? Not just to answer what we're doing today, but to think about what logical next steps are that we might be able to think just about the next smart question from the data.
Well, Julie, given what you just shared, what was the starting point for you two to become connected on an ongoing basis? Is it something that you were jumping up and down looking for data, or did you have a story to tell? And how did you find one another?
Yeah, so I think there are lots of ways that teams like ours interact. In the larger kind of sense of Walmart, we really started a human capital transformation almost 5 years ago with an investment that at the time we talked about as $2.7 billion over a couple of years in wages, training, education, scheduling, really trying to rethink the frontline value proposition. And so in that, you're asking a lot of questions about what investments have you made and what are you seeing from them. I think where my team starts to play an even more kind of at the table role in this is as the world advances and are thinking about environmental, social, and governance metrics, which is what our team spends a lot of time with investors, with external stakeholders, thinking about. People like John become critical for us to say, what are the smart metrics for us to pay attention to? How are we getting to them? What are we seeing in them? And so those are just two ways that our team has really come together with people like John to make sure we're doing this well.
Yeah, and I think, super tactically as part of our environmental, social, and governance reporting structure, my team, just like finance teams, validate data points that are released in our annual report and earnings statements. If there's human capital, if there's HR-related data points, we have a pretty robust kind of workflow where it's going to be published externally. We have, folks that run the queries, we validate the queries, have those signed off by a subject matter expert. So my team helps to tactically execute on those when it relates to HR data. And then, fortunately for us, Walmart is an incredibly diverse spectrum of populations. And even, you say Walmart's a retailer. Well, you take a service deli and a supercenter that operates more like a restaurant than it does, a retail outlet. We have thousands of software engineers. We have data scientists. We have actuaries. We even have a couple lifeguards, believe it or not, that work in our fitness center.
Pilots,
drivers, you name it. We probably have them somewhere at Walmart. And the only way that we have a ghost of a chance of doing some of this data-driven analysis is to have a centralized function that has visibility into that into that data. And to nerd out a little bit about the technology, it's, building those data pipelines across our incredibly wide variety of HR systems, given that we've got acquisitions, we have international markets, in order to have some semblance. I'm not saying we've got it figured out, because if we did, then I probably would have, had a lot of publications already on this, of harmonizing all that. But as best as we can from a technology and a data standpoint, using that as a foundation so that, teams like Julie can ask those questions, and we at least have a platform to start answering them in a robust way.
Got it. And I so celebrate this. And you were on a panel earlier this morning and shared that this is something that you all as an organization are proactively doing. It's not because there's an external body making you do this. This is part of your culture, part of your mandate, to self-imposed mandate to give back. So can you speak to that and how this is part of your ethos now there?
Sure. I mean, this is really a journey. And while we're really proud of the progress we're making, we've got a lot to learn and a lot to do. And the data helps us think about, frankly, sometimes the data tells you how much further you can go, and really reinforces that as much work as it feels like we've done, we've got a long way we can still go. But when you step back and think about the strategy of the company, on a sheet of paper, we think about really our core purpose, which is save money, live better. And that live better we take very seriously. We're famous for the saving money, but it really needs to be in service of not only our customers being able to save money so that they can invest that in putting their kids to college, those kinds of things, but also in how we deliver our core business, that multiple stakeholders benefit, and really that the associate, the term we use for our employees, has to be at the heart of that. And so when you do that, and when you have this, we really do believe that the economic, the environmental, and the social outcomes come together in the long term. And so we believe it's in our best interest as a company, not just kind of this side gig that's good for the world, but rather this embedded in who the company is and how we operate, that when we solve those problems, it actually makes the company stronger.
So given what you're sharing, Julie, I imagine your job is challenging for a lot of reasons, scale, but what I'm hearing is that there's some economic, some business needs that need to be met, but there's also this humanitarian and social responsibility needs. There needs to be a balance. So how do you prioritize? There's so much that can and needs to be done within metrics and analytics. How do you say, we're going to do this project, and how do you communicate it upwards across the organization so, it actually drives some desired outcome?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I describe Walmart scale as it's the reason why I'm excited to get up in the morning and come to work. It's also the reason why I sometimes cry myself to sleep at night. Because
it's also why you can have a job forever.
why you can have a job
there's so
forever.
many problems to think about.
That's exactly right. And, that question of prioritization is a big one, because, there literally are not enough hours in the day. I could hire a team of 100,000 people, and we still would not be able to work on every single request that comes across our desk. So it really is around the blend of the art and the science of, is there a way to measure success for a particular project, whether that's directly economically, whether there is some metric of success like attrition that we do have linked to cost of attrition, that kind of stuff, or does this align to some of the environmental, social, and governance goals that we have set? Whether it's our commitment to hiring veterans, whether it's our commitment to environmental impact and carbon emission reductions, things like that. So where we can tie it to a metric, a measurable outcome that we kind of already have leadership buy-in for, that helps things bubble up to the top. But I would say one thing that we're particularly diligent about too is reserving a portion of our team's bandwidth to also do some of that fundamental and foundational and core research that you can't really tie a number to yet, but we know it's the right thing to do. We know that we have to make the investment now so that we can start to realize the benefits of that. Not just in the same fiscal year, but in years to come.
I absolutely love it, because many people in our field get bogged down by compliance metrics or the basic metrics within core HR, and we're starting to realize, again, referring to the panel from earlier this morning, that there's new data that can be or should be created to answer the questions leaders want or need to know, or that are going to benefit the workforce that leaders might not even have visibility to right now. So what I'm hearing is that you're allowing some room for creativity and innovation to percolate.
And I'd say kind of part of what is benefiting my organization. So I sit within the technology function. I'm a hardcore nerd, at the very center of my being. and the benefit that the organization gets from that is we have a huge focus on automation. We have a huge focus on technology. So some of the more, I don't know if it's right to call them mundane, but the more structured metrics and required reporting that we have to do, we try and leverage technology to automate as much of that as possible, so that we can free up kind of the mental capacity and emotional bandwidth of the team to work on some of the more forward thinking and problems that are still in their formulation phase versus devoting a bunch of people hours into saying, all right, well, we have to crank out this report every day or every week or every quarter.
And did I hear you correctly? You want to leverage existing measures that already have the automated delivery. In other words, like turnover, good, bad, is that, and you're adding to that story or adding to the story around that metric, not just creating something new. Is that a fair summary?
Fair summary, and it's interesting because I love standardized metrics. They're kind of a double-edged sword. Standardized metrics, the benefits are a lot of what you've articulated. So there are kind of standard ways to calculate them. You can automate them. It's a lot easier to get consensus and agreement across business leadership because it's not, no, my interpretation of how we should measure this. It's, no, here is a standard definition of how this should be measured. And we see a lot of that, obviously, in things like financial statements. The other side of that is it's tough to provide sometimes context around a standardized measurement. So you take something, I'll start on the financial side, cash balance. Cash balance is a number. There's a way to calculate that number. That number could be good or bad. The same number could be good or bad depending on the size of your company, the industry you're in, the dynamics of your industry. Same thing with something like turnover. There is a way to calculate turnover. Everyone can come up with a number. That same number, when you look at two different firms and two different dynamics, could be good, could be bad. And so I think it's that balance and taking the advantages of standard calculations, but also being able to give the appropriate context to somebody looking at that and trying to interpret that, understands how they should interpret it, and not misinterpret it.
Well, thank you for that. And you said earlier, Julie, this morning, you were talking about, in a related way, you have and again, if I'm not articulating it properly, please take it from it, that you want people to leave Walmart and actually go out and go on their journey.
Be better for it.
Be better, and you're enabling that, and it's okay. So the question to bridge what you just shared and where we're going is that historically there's been, okay, we want to shrink turnover as much as possible, yet being okay that we are part of someone's journey and helping enable that journey, and that's falls squarely into your field, is that right?
It does, and we have, as part of, when Walmart announced its transformation, part of what we said is, we recognize we're a large company and we're able to make some investments that many companies can't. And so at the same time, we announced a $100 million investment in upward mobility focused on frontline service workers for the field, which is an interesting thing. I spend time with our competitors and others, encouraging them to think in this way. Building resources that small businesses can use, those kinds of things. And part of that really is thinking that an ecosystem will benefit all. And that this reinvestment in the frontline workforce to build skills is an essential part of what's going to be needed in our economy as it moves faster. As it changes. And so that really does get to us thinking about not just turnover, but healthy turnover with a good outcome for an associate versus turnover because this job was not working for them. And that becomes much more complicated because often they leave the data set, in easy terms. And so how do we do that? How do we think about that becomes really important. And frankly, that's not something we have our full arms around. It's an aspiration of Walmart that their role at Walmart help them move to the next thing. But that also is very individualized.
Yeah.
What one person says is a great next step for me may be different than what the other is. And so how do you marry that all together becomes a really difficult job. And I think also going back to something John said about this kind of, there's one set of metrics that works really well within a company, but then you move to a world of ESG and measurement, and they become comparative and can become complex because they may not have the same methodology. Even with the same methodology, we find that they can be complicated. Yeah. So often, and I spend time in both worlds, we hear reference from the human capital space that, oh, the sustainability space is so much farther ahead, and what can we learn? And I think that's a good thing to be challenging ourselves with. But it's also something that they haven't gotten yet either, because, industry matters. What is a material issue for one, and I don't mean material in SEC terms, but in more of a Webster's dictionary term, for one company and one industry isn't for the other when it comes to something like carbon emissions.
Do you mind defining ESG for?
Sure. Yeah. So environmental and social and governance. And this is a set of metrics that's emerging and being, really developed in order to say what role is a company playing in the world. Yeah. And today, many of them are about risk mitigation. I think we believe they need to also start to think about what's the value creation side of this. But that's really hard, and it gets into a lot of what John focuses on.
It's not that easy to measure, right?
Yeah, it's not easy to measure, and I think Julie brings up a great point about when you start to compare kind of sets of metrics. People rush to the metrics because that's what you can see, that's what you can touch and feel, and look at it in a report and say, are we good or bad? What firms and enterprises and regulators need to realize is there's a lot of foundational process work and investment that have to happen in order to enable controls and governance around the calculation of metrics. So, I go back to my finance background, and there is a very robust closing process that every company has, and whether you close quarterly or you have a hard or a soft close monthly, that process has been ingrained in everyone to produce these standard financial reports. On some of these other areas, you might not have that concept of a hard close or even a soft close and retroactive updates and adjustments and that. So how do you account for some of these things? Because the more rigor that you put on the reporting side, there's a lot of these almost prerequisite control frameworks that you might have to think about, which all require investments, not just in people, but system providers and all of that, just to make sure that you have an apples to apples comparison when you actually report the numbers at the end of the process.
As both you and I know, it doesn't happen by magic. It takes
that's a lot of work.
And so, I want to toggle a little bit, but leverage what you just talked about. And it relates to the future of work. We're in this place in time, 2019, 2020, where AI, globalization, robotic automation, all these things are disrupting industries, obviously retail, among them. So I imagine as you look at social responsibility, as you're looking at the metrics that are going to not only matter currently, but in the future, thinking about how things are going to shift over time. Is that a fair statement, and how are you addressing that?
We spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I think the first thing we would say is it's not some future thing; it's absolutely happening. And ideally, this is going to lead to higher skilled jobs, really interesting jobs, some of the mundane work potentially going away, so that people can focus on customer service, and it can be really reinvested in things that, frankly, bring more satisfaction to the workforce. But doing it is hard. And it's a change mechanism. And one of the things that I think we've learned is this investment in frontline training we believe is helping us move faster in the right ways.
Share more about that.
Sure. So over the last couple of years, Walmart has built out a network of what we call Walmart Academies. There are 200 facilities across the country, physical classrooms, everything taught by iPad, so digital skills embedded in the learning. The associates spend about half the time in that classroom, and they're co-located with the store. So in about half the time on the store floor, learning side by side in the job. And, there's some standard classes, but they can also be used as short-term upskilling when new things roll out. All of this allows there's now VR in stores being used to do quick training as new technology rolls out. And so this real investment, I think John and his team have done some great measurement to say the academies are helping us drive retention, both of the people who participate and the people who report to them. And part of what's unique is academies are universal on the job training by job code. So it's not kind of an optional thing or a shoulder tap of your high potential. It's really for everybody in that role.
So immediate value for the individual
and the company. But part of what I think we haven't captured yet, and John can think about how we might, is the speed at which that's allowing the company to reinvent the business model, to be a more omni-channel customer. Things like grocery pickup that we have today. You know, we have a model where you can order your groceries online, pull into the parking lot, get them loaded into the car. We didn't have that 2 or 3 years ago. That's close to 40,000 people that play roles, that have jobs to facilitate this. That is only able to roll that quickly, partially because you have a strong investment in training.
Yeah, and some of this kind of a specific example related to what Julie is, the concept of a personal shopper, which is now, you know, there is someone that actually has to, you know, everything doesn't magically appear in those bags, and the bags don't magically appear in the trunk of your car when you pull up to an online grocery pickup station. There is now a new category and new job code of associate that now fulfills that function that, as Julie mentioned, didn't exist a few years ago. And as we think about, again, the business impact of the portability of some of these skills, it's, if you were to hire all those people, you know, fresh off the street, you know, starting from zero, that is an incredibly complex process. But now, because of the investment that we've made in our frontline associates, and we can understand, well, as new positions like this open up, how we can take advantage and leverage that investment to place associates, existing associates in those roles, just helps to, you know, shorten the cycle time from a business impact standpoint of filling those new roles. And then from an individual associate impact, you know, they have a much better kind of career trajectory and you know, relationship with the company.
And the getting, I mean, I think one of the things that really is important in what John said, and it facilitates it all, is most of the future of work is not entire jobs going away. It's portions of the skills of the job, the task within a job. And it doesn't happen all at once. And so instead of having a system where it says, okay, this job no longer exists, these people are displaced, it is, okay, half of your job is still there in the task you've done. We've now got some additional tasks and how do we make sure that people are trained and upskilled and can move and really have a career within a company and move across. But that is hard work. It's things I know you've been thinking about, of like, what's the taxonomy of skills? How does all of this work so that we can really track and do this well? Which is a whole field that has to be created in some ways and matured in real ways.
Absolutely agree. I think that we're moving in this discipline, people analytics, towards formulating work strategies, or at least providing input into how work can get done, given disruptions. But to your point, that takes understanding how to measure work, how to identify, build taxonomy around skills, find those skills, develop those skills, and all that. So how is that informing your work? Do you see the future in some way? Yeah,
it's certainly informing the work. And I kind of half made a joke, but it's also true. You know, I don't get funding for a project called skills taxonomy.
Right.
Like none of my peers are going to get funding for that. What we do get funding for is, you know, personalized learning, career and mobility recommendation, skills workforce planning, things like that we can, you know, tie to ROI, which now require fundamental work and foundational work in things like creating a skills taxonomy. Because without that, you know, you don't even have a consistent language that you can, you know, use to talk about the future of work. So that's kind of how we approached it. And luckily, you know, our leadership team has been very supportive and understanding that, you know, you have to eat your vegetables too. It's not just like, this is what you read about in a magazine, or this isn't just the AI, the ML, the, you know, insert kind of new topic here. But there's this foundational core work that we have to prioritize, and prioritize means, you know, resources and budget and people and effort, and not just monetary investment, but mind share from our leadership team to talk about these things and recognize that it has to be done too.
You know, I mean, I love what you're saying so much, and you, as three people right here, right now, can agree. It's another thing to get agreement at scale, get people to see the world in a similar way, and thus mandate or authorize these, commission these projects. So my point of question, going back to what you shared again at the outset, is you come and ask John questions, and you stay in curiosity, and he provides ideas of what's possible. There's 20, 30, 40, 100 Julies. you got a lot of whoa. So again, going back to the skills and work, how are decisions going to be made on that moving forward? When you say leadership team, I assume you're talking about leadership team, not HR leadership. You're talking about everyone getting on the same page. So what does that look like? How do you get that group on the same page?
I think part of it is kind of finding the canary in the coal mine. Like, what is the proof of concept? Where is that place that we can land and expand to say, well, if we can solve a particular problem in this area of the business, it will lend itself more easily to be pervaded across the rest of the organization. So that's kind of one of the criteria that we use, because at our scale, like, I would venture to say provocatively, like, we cannot solve any single problem for the entire company at one go. I can't even fathom a problem that we could do at that scale. So really, your only option is, how do you land and expand and prioritize those areas where, okay, this is an easy stepping stone, or at least there is a path of stepping stones to solving this problem, and then you solve it a little bit bigger, and then if you solve it for one leader or one segment of the business, you understand what considerations you might have to get through, or take that to other segments of the business. So really, that goes into a lot of how we prioritize work. In addition to kind of the impact and the ROI, is what are the problems where, all right, if I solve this problem, really there isn't a stepping stone to scale it. So that might not be as high priority given the scarcity of resources, but if we solve it here, and it's high impact, and if we solve it here, there's a path across the rest of the company. That's a big part of what we think about.
I also think there's a strategy piece of this. And, when it's working well, and it doesn't every day, and it doesn't every day in any company, you really do have kind of aligned HR shifts from, what may be a compliance function in some companies to a real strategic portion of the company. And there's a clear philosophy of what is the value proposition to your associates. And when you have alignment at a strategic level across leadership on some of those pieces of this is the value proposition, it becomes much easier to prioritize what do we need to measure. Because if we're going to define ourselves and our value to our workforce on this, it's probably going to get more resourcing. And it becomes a much more kind of consistent conversation across leaders, and you get a little less. You still always have the competition of there's a long line of projects, but you get much more alignment that, yes, these are some of our big bets that we've got to deliver on.
I think one of the benefits, too, of us not having to spend a lot of our time currently on just, satisfying regulatory requirements, compliance reporting requirements is, we know all of the things that we're working on and the things we want to do versus have to do. And so there's that balance there too, which is an interesting dynamic, particularly in a space, and the fact that, you've got HR and technology, which sometimes historically have been seen as, cost centers, supporting functions, all that, but really now given the appetite and really the bright line that, we've been able to draw between associate success, associate investment into economic success, it's kind of shifting that mindset from, all right, well, how do we get these cost centers or back office functions to kind of come together and do work for us, to this is actually a foundational strategic pillar within the organization.
And I imagine there's an ongoing meeting rhythm to that, or communication rhythm. What is that? Is that quarterly? Is that, or does it not happen that way? Is that wishful thinking? Or literally, how do people understand that this is the project agenda, this is what we're going after, and maybe use the academies as an example?
Sure. Do you want to talk about the world in which you live?
Yeah, I'd say like I'm probably triple booked like 23 hours a day, and they let me have a half an hour to eat and a half an hour to sleep. But kind of outside that, we have some rhythms that are more strategic in nature. So quarterly, here's kind of the big pillars of what we're working on.
You actually carve out space to have those conversations.
Yeah, we carve out space to actually have those conversations, and then when you get down to kind of the project or the initiative level, it's a much more iterative process. We try and borrow as much as we can from kind of your software methodologies like Agile or Scrum, things like that. So we have ways to track our backlog. People can have visibility into what we have prioritized, that kind of thing. And then depending on the project and the stakeholders, kind of various rhythms at a project level. But at that strategic level, there is that regular cadence of, well, here's what's big on our plate right now. Senior leaders, is everybody okay with this? If not, here's kind of the forum to have that discussion, that prioritization discussion.
Yeah. Well, great to hear, particularly given, just to echo what you shared, that people analytics, talent analytics, historically has been viewed as very esoteric. It's over there, it's a bunch of feather heads in the room. And it sounds like you have some connective tissue on an ongoing basis that makes it real. And it's not about the process, it's actually the value that's delivering. So a couple of themes before we wrap up here. We've been talking about impacting people. And so, if we're in analytics, there in some organizations there's a perception that I'm either consciously generating a lot of data, or I sense that a lot of data is being generated, yet I do not know how it's being used. So maybe with the academies or some other initiative, how do you communicate to your workforce of 2.2 million, if I heard that correctly, what is happening, what might be forthcoming, or does that communication not happen at that scale? It might happen at a higher level. What does that look like?
I think that's really hard, and it doesn't always happen very well. Right. Particularly, for somebody who my main communication method is email, that's probably not the best one for, a frontline associate that's helping customers most of the time they're really at their work. I do think that one of the things we're really trying to get better at, and Academies is a great example, is engaging people like John in the front end of program design. I think one of the things, as somebody who does a lot of program design, too often those rooms don't have kind of analytics and measurement plans built in the beginning. And it's more, we've spent all this money, now help us figure out whether it worked. Versus really embedding that from the beginning. And that, to me, makes a big difference.
I could hug you for saying that, and I could hug you for inspiring her to say that. Because I couldn't agree more. Often we're asked, okay, how do we measure that? After that, well, it would have been great.
Yeah. What data have you been? Oh, nothing? Okay, well, I guess we'll start now.
Please.
Oh, and I would say, so 100% agree with that. It is exponentially easier to actually embed telemetry on the front of a process or project. And from a communication standpoint, I think one of the other things we're trying to do is, meet people where they are. So utilizing traditional communication mechanisms like email, digital signage, even things like, lock screens on people's PCs in the home office. So, we have some kind of mechanisms where we can deploy messaging to a lot of those different surfaces in a more coordinated fashion. So doing a little bit of work there, but as Julie said, it's tough to do that at a certain level.
I think the other thing you and your team really have been a champion of is, as you've been able to automate the basics, that has given and really fight to make transparent a lot of things. Dashboards, those kinds of things make a difference because now frontline, often leadership, have access to a lot of data they might not have had otherwise. And you don't have to come and ask for it. It's in an app. It's in those kinds of things. And that makes it much easier for, a store manager to really be strategic about their use of human capital. And really know and diagnose what might be going on. But that is the kind of shift to be very transparent about that, to put data in people's hands. Is a big deal and takes work from people like John to do it.
You spend more time acting on data versus trying to dig around and find it.
Right. Well, I celebrate so much that you two are here sharing your insights and ideas, but I'm also, I hope it emerges at a leading practice that people analytics, workforce analytics leaders are aligned and coordinating with those who are leading philanthropy and giving back. So, thank you for sharing. Any closing comments before we wrap?
No, I would say, it's been a great experience. Love the conversation. Love to hear that some of the challenges we face, we're not alone, even though, we have the scale that we have. But yeah, I mean, it's been a great partnership and willing to share.
Thank you for having us. I think it's really exciting because I do think there's a huge opportunity. We were with kind of the group and talking about ESG and how many of the team members are involved in that, and kind of just a few hands went up. And it feels like that will change dramatically over the next couple of years. And so hopefully we'll see more emergence of kind of partnerships in this thinking, because I think we'll only get the measurement of the social and the human capital elements right with data analytics and human capital experts in the center of that.
Now we're getting there. Well, again, thanks to you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you.